You are watching News 9 Live. I'm Krishna Kumar, and we're going to discuss something that's been doing the rounds on the media and on your social media. A lot of people wondering what it's all about. The Silicon Valley Bank collapse. What is it all about? And more importantly, should you be worried about the Silicon Valley Bank collapse? How much of an impact does it have on India, Indian companies? What could possibly happen to you? Should you be worried? Because at the end of the day, the latest we understand on this matter is that the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, has started a review of India and Indian companies and Indian banks' exposures to the Silicon Valley Bank that has collapsed just a few days ago. Now, before we get into the details, let's quickly get across to our guest who's going to help us understand this, the wonderful Kasturi Shankar, joining us live from Chennai. She's going to help us understand, what this whole thing is all about. Kasturi, thank you so much. Let's begin with the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. I told my friend was like, I'm only worried about the bank in my own sector. As long as that doesn't collapse, I'm good. If you can help us understand, why should we even be discussing this matter, the Silicon Valley Bank collapse?
Well, to start with, to give a brief introduction on the Silicon Valley Bank, until it got shut down, it was the 16th largest bank in the United States, an FDIC insured bank, and it was the favorite destination for startup companies. So it had billions of dollars in deposits and in just money parked with them for all these years. It's been probably the go-to bank for both investment as well as lender. It was one of the biggest lenders in Silicon Valley. And startups being what they are, there is a huge Indian presence in the startup sphere. So the immediate fear, and to put this in perspective, there are very few Indian banks which also have American operations. I think State Bank of India, Bank of Baroda, Bank of India, very few banks actually operate in America with American-based branches and American-based operations. So this was something that immediately affects startup people, especially companies like Nazara, which has been in the news significantly.
Nazara Technologies,
because they are exposed
the video game
to it. I think
the computer gaming
yes,
company.
Nazara Technologies is a holding company, but they hold several gaming apps and businesses that have full milakar 65 crores in Indian rupees exposed to the Silicon Valley Bank. So there was a proverbial run on the bank just last week because their CEO went on record and said, we've had some financial problems, so we have reached out for about 2 billion in external investment. Very bad thing to say. When a bank goes out and says, we are looking for external investment in our bank and we are trying to sell a few of our assets in order to smoothen out the ruffles in our balance sheet, the message that people hear is, we are in trouble, we don't have enough funds to cover your debts, and therefore we don't have enough funds to cover our creditors. So, we are looking for money ourselves. That's not what a bank says. And the saddest part of this is Silicon Valley Bank, when it folded, had enough coverage to cover its debts. It had enough and more. I think it had about $1.8 billion in reserves, and they had no reason to push the panic button, but they did very, very widely criticized move by the CEO Becker. He didn't have to discuss his financial issues in the name of transparency or forthrightness or whatever. So what he ended up doing was he ended up raising an unnecessary alarm, and then there was a run on the bank. About $42 billion was pulled out of the bank in one day alone. No bank can deal with that kind of a run.
Fair enough, fair
So
enough.
the US government stepped in and shut down operations. They've also said that everybody's money down to the last penny will be accounted for. I don't know how that's going to pan out.
Fair
I'm
enough.
not
We'll
that much of believer.
Yeah, whenever a bank folds up, those are the kind of questions that are difficult to answer, Kasturi. You know that, and Silicon Valley Bank is no exception. There's going to be a lot of discussion about who let Silicon Valley Bank fold up. That debate is going to go on for a while. But let's quickly get in. Before we get in, let's tell people also like how it all went down, how the cookie crumbled. The bank invested billions of dollars in U.S. government bonds. And then the U.S. Fed, the U.S. Federal Reserve, the central bank of the U.S., raised interest rates to fight inflation. Investors then became risk averse and pulled out huge sums of money. And then the Silicon Valley Bank stock fell by 60% to the point where the trading completely ceased next day. And that's how this cookie crumbled. And then eventually regulators stepped in and then completely shut down the bank. So, now we're at a stage where we're discussing that now that this is folded up, Kasturi, you were talking about Indian companies, Nazara, there's also Paytm, there are, other companies, that are exposed or have exposure to the Silicon Valley Bank.
Today's news, I read about a couple of other smaller companies who are all exposed to a tune of a few crores in Indian rupees to the bank. But I think the Indian exposure in the bigger picture is very, very minimal, and it's not going to cause too much of a difference to our economy or anything. It's not. I think the Indian markets are by far insulated from the Silicon Valley Bank collapse.
All right. So your initial feeling is that
Nazara has come out and given explanations that they've been in business for decades now, and they have enough operating capital to go around. So but I'm hearing reports that the people they're not able to pull out their money. Nobody's able to pull out money anymore. Everybody has been assured that they can, but nobody has been able to pull out money. That's the report coming out today.
That's the latest from the Silicon Valley, so to speak, you were saying. But how does the tech community, you think, views this? Because there's a lot of blame being placed in tech community. This is the bank that helped build Silicon Valley, so to speak, and the Silicon Valley companies have allowed Silicon Valley Bank to fail. That's how this is played out.
I didn't get that. What? Silicon Valley companies
so the point is
the bank to fail? Is that what
would you say, that's how this seems to have played out, because this is a bank that is, that's a bank that built Silicon Valley, that helped build Silicon Valley, and today that has collapsed. It's ironic.
Yeah, I'm going to actually draw a parallel to, I don't know if you were old enough to remember, there was a huge financial alarm bell once in Indian Bank in Tamil Nadu, because they were heavily exposed to movies, and they were a big lender because the head, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, he was in every movie. They would show his face, because he would have lent, he would have funded all those movies. He had so much exposure to movies and production houses, independent production houses, that didn't really return their money on time, walked away. There were other finance companies that, RBF, ABF, in Tamil Nadu, smaller scale, they would expose themselves to risky business. And then when the whispers of money not coming back, their balance sheet looking a little wobbly, when the whispers become louder and louder, they are forced into a corner, and then there's only one way from there, which is down. I think Silicon Valley Bank also exposed itself to, when you start lending based on a speculation, when you do that, there are going to be more people coming and approaching you. When you lend to one startup and you lend to another startup, when that's your model of business, startups will come to you for investment. Startups will come to you for financial support. So you really have to figure out where you draw the line and what are the backup plans you have, how much reserves you choose to hold, how will you, what is your strategy for keeping your credit line sound, you know. In this case, it's really not fair to say the companies allowed it to fold, because companies, startups will do what startups will do. Some of them will will be solid, and most of them will be speculative. So it is the bank's duty to do its due diligence. It's the bank's duty to make sure its debts are returned in time, or at least serviced in time.
All right.
So
Fair enough. Fair enough.
it's
Let's
like
not
it's
let's
like
not
the
let's not
housing
blame
bubble.
Silicon Valley for anything at this point in time. Fair enough. Point taken. The other thing I want to ask you, Kasturi, is also this. This is being compared with the Lehman collapse of 2008, and that's the reason why we're discussing this. A lot of people are very concerned because, like, oh my God, Lehman? Are we back to 2008 again? Are we in a time machine to 2008? Talk to us about that.
You're completely cutting up. Can you repeat that for me, please?
Are we in a case of the 2008 financial crisis because this collapse is being compared to the Lehman collapse of 2008?
Right. I think you're asking me how this is comparable to the 2008 collapse.
Right.
We are still getting details. I don't want to end up crying wolf for causing even more panic than there is already in the market right now. But the Lehman Brothers was a story of systematic insider trading, very lax regulations, very lax follow up on what they were doing. It was a story of incredible financial malpractice, fueled by a lot of contacts and networks, and who's connected to who. These guys knew what was happening, and they actually hid it from the American public. They hid it from the government. They hid it from the regulators. I don't think Silicon Valley Bank was quite there. I think their run today was actually fueled by the opposite. I think they kind of came out and admitted that they are in a difficult situation prematurely. I think they should have worded their statements much more carefully. They kind of just threw themselves under the bus. That's how I see it. So, plus, okay, Lehman was a huge disaster from the Indian point of view. I mean, the Lehman's collapse ended up resulting in a recession, a huge round of layoffs, the housing bubble. It was a mess. It took a while for America to recover from that, and in completely connected to it, the world had to pay for the faults, for the crimes and misdemeanors, if you will, of one financial institutions. And then there were the too big to fail institutions, which all failed one by one. So I think Silicon Valley Bank, unfortunately, is not that big a bank, even by American standards and even by Indian standards. We at least are not that exposed to it. Our biggest banks are not that exposed to it. I would say that our exposure to a Yes Bank or a Punjab National Bank was something a little bit more concerning than our than SBI's exposure to SVB, which is zero. So I would actually venture to say that.
Fair enough, Kasturi. Thank you so much for bringing us that perspective. So clearly, Silicon Valley Bank collapse is a tragedy as far as Silicon Valley is concerned, but Indian investors can breathe a sigh of relief. But they have their regular problems to contend with. Kasturi, before we let it go, quickly, the US Fed has raised interest rates. Should that concern Indians at this stage for any butterfly effect to come back to us from there, from the US Fed hike?
Here's the thing. In America, most people have, we say that when the Republicans are in power, the economy does really good. It's the economy stupid is the slogan of the Republicans, and the Democrats, whenever they take over, there's usually war, that is not answered for in many parts of the world, and the economy slumps. These two are like cyclical patterns every time the Democrats come into power. It's happened now. Um, there's a war that we thought will subside, will be resolved in a matter of few weeks, and 1 year down the line, no end in sight, no resolution in sight. Uh, the economy going on a downward spiral. The Fed is not helping by regularly increasing rates. Every time the Fed increase rates, it sends a message to the American economy that you guys need to tighten your belts and brace up for something worse to come. That's the message they get. So the housing market slowed down. The economy slowed down. When the American economy slows down, the global economy slows down. The US is the biggest economy in the world and the biggest spender in the world. When they
Exactly.
don't, the world suffers. India is highly dependent on the US dollar. When the US dollar gets harder to get, the Indian rupee loses more value. Our businesses suffer, our exports suffer. It's a effect, but it's not a butterfly.
Direct correlation.
It's a snake bite.
Oh wow, snake bite. Oh, that stings. That's more than just stinging. That's life threatening, and that's the reason why that's no laughing matter. But it's good to have you, Kasturi, with us. To understand what kind of times we're in for economically. But I want to take this back to the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. How do you tell people how to view a piece of news like this that pops up on their feed? They see Silicon Valley Bank collapse. Those two words never sound good to anybody. You don't want any bank to collapse, at the end of the day. And there's so much of misinformation. There's so much of, you have to really thread through social media and media to help understand how one should react to that, isn't it, Kasturi?
Also because it's a highly politicized incident as well. So everybody is blaming everybody. There are people who are tying this up to governments in China and India. This is all Modi's fault, and there are memes coming out about every time something happens. It's Modi ne good luck diya to the Modi effect has shown its impact and stuff like that. This is all irrelevant, number one, and ridiculous at the very minimum, because none of us are gurus. We are not financial gurus. Um, Out of the Indian population, of even the 1% of Indian population that can actually afford any kind of investment tied to any kind of US bank, I think there's like about 3% of that 1%. So that's 0.003% of any Indian funds is exposed to an American bank. So really, all you have to know is that America is not infallible. And when a bank collapses, there are many reasons for it. A startup bank had in its nature, the business was more speculative in nature, but usually it's more about management than about investments and strategy. So one cannot just say, oh, in Silicon Valley Bank, because the name is Silicon Valley Bank. They have branches in Germany, they have branches in Europe, are doing well. The London branch is actually very close to takeover um, by British financial institutions. I think they are being taken over. Their debt completely being taken over for £1. So it's not that money is going to disappear. Some money will, but it's not as bad as the 2008 collapse. I think we all can wait and watch at this point, and
All right.
Indian public not going to be affected. American public not going to be affected. Businesses, especially in Silicon Valley, some of them, startups, some of them are going to be affected, but not everybody puts their eggs in one basket. It's not that every startup which had money in Silicon Valley is going to go bust. They're
That's
all
right.
going to have ways and means of recapturing some value at least. So
All right.
wait and watch time. We'll watch this space.
Well, we need to keep watching this space. That's why we are here. That's why you're here. Thank you so much, Kasturi, for taking time out between your extremely busy schedule to speak to us and help us understand something that's very important that we all must understand. And please continue to be with us on this matter and other matters. As we know, your versatility is impeccable. So we will keep coming to you on other matters apart from the Silicon Valley Bank apps-related stuff. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. And with that, it's a wrap on this particular discussion as well. Thank you so much for all those watching this particular discussion on News 9 Live. Keep it with News 9.